This new Bob Woodward book, State of Denial, is well named, but I think it's important to point out that if you are an ideologue, denial is an essential part of your political being. Whichever side, listen to me. You've got to, because if you're an ideologue, you've got your mind made up. So when an inconvenient fact crops up, you have to be in denial. It has to be a less significant fact. Ron Suskind wrote a book, a related book called The 1% Solution. I don't know if any of you have read that. He also co-wrote former Bush Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill's memoirs. But the most interesting thing to me in this 1% solution is not the part that people have talked about 9/11. That no one, I don't know whether that's true or not, but Mr. Suskind says in the 1% solution that the ideologues within the current government refer to people not just like me, although I'm included, but even moderate Republicans like Colin Powell and Admiral Scowcroft as somehow lesser political mortals because we are trapped in, quote, the reality-based world. And what they mean by that, in fairness to them, what they mean by that is that we are an empire, we're the world's only military superpower, and if you can use power to change reality. And if you don't see that, then you'll always be condemning your country to a lesser status. When I was a kid, I grew up in an alcoholic home. I spent half my childhood trying to get into the reality-based world, and I like it here. People ask me all the time, what great new idea did you and Bob Rubin bring to economic policy making in Washington? I say, you know, Rubin came down and he put all that sort of fancy Goldman Sachs type spin on what we were doing, but the truth is all we brought to Washington was arithmetic. I had this dumb idea that if 2 and 2 was 4 in Little Rock, it probably was in Washington. And sure enough, it turned out to be right. Now, we're all laughing here, but I'm laughing to make, I want you to laugh so I can make a point. This is not about conservative or liberal philosophies. You can argue whether on problem X or Y or Z you need more or less government. You can argue whether you get more growth from stimulating the business side of things or training workers better. You can have an argument about trade, about whether you should be more protectionist or more free trade, or you need what I think trade plus, labor and environmental standards to lift everybody around the world. You can have these arguments, but in every case, the evidence is relevant. In every case, the act of entering into a conversation with someone else and listening to what they have to say means that you know you might not be right about everything. You might have something to learn. There might be an ongoing process in which, when you put all these perspectives together, you come out with something that will actually move the ball forward toward a more perfect union, that will actually make lives better for ordinary Americans. I believe, while much has changed in the last 15 years, the acceleration to an interdependent global economy based on information technology is more apparent. It's clearer than it was then that we're all vulnerable to terror, to weapons of mass destruction, to climate change. Much has changed, but that has not changed. The relentless search for the common good to devise policies that promote equal opportunity, shared responsibility, and inclusive community is still relevant to the present day. And to have a politics that celebrates our partisan differences, loves our brawling debates, but has just enough humility to know that we all might be wrong and that we have something to learn from one another, I believe that is still relevant. And I believe that you can make a compelling case that it works. For me, the ultimate test is not whether the intellectual architecture of my view as opposed to the view of those that are running things now is more pristine and less messy, but whether people are going to be better off when you quit than when you started. So these common good philosophies, when I was president, we had 22.9 or 8 million new jobs, 50% more in our 8 years than in the previous 12 years, and the ratio will be better compared to the subsequent 8 years. More important to me, based on what President DeGioia said about the percentage of low-income people getting four-year college degrees, 100 times as many people moved out of poverty in our 8 years as in the previous 12 years. 100 times. That was policy for the common good. What were these policies? Well, we changed the Community Reinvestment Act, which requires federally insured banks to invest in their communities. $800 billion was invested under those provisions in those 8 years. That was 95% of all the money ever invested under the Community Reinvestment Act, which was passed in the 1970s. This is one example. Something people don't even know about, something we did by executive order, but it was a common good philosophy, and it turned out to be good for the banks too. The empowerment zones, the enterprise communities, all the urban development initiatives, the welfare reform initiatives I talked to you about. When we passed the budget in 1993, which passed by one vote in a strict party line vote, one vote in both houses, it raised taxes on upper income people, raised the gas tax 4.3%, as I remember, and cut taxes on lower income working families. 15 times as many people got a tax cut as a tax increase. We doubled the earned income tax credit. That alone took over 2 million children out of poverty. When we raised the minimum wage, it lifted the earnings of 10 million people. And I tried to do it twice, and we haven't done it since. We provided more health care options for low-income families. We had the biggest expansion in health care coverage since Medicaid in the 60s with the Children's Health Insurance Program. We had the biggest increase in college aid since the GI Bill at the end of World War II. 10 million more people were getting college assistance through tax credits or Pell Grants or work-study programs than when we started. There was average hourly wages actually went up in my second term as against inflation for the first time since 1973. Now, the number of people without health insurance went down. I could keep you here all day talking about other statistics, but the point is, this works, a focus on the common good. Turns out to be good. We had more millionaires and billionaires than ever before. But the biggest income gains percentage-wise were in the bottom quintile. It works. It's good for everybody. And it's more important now than ever because whenever an economic paradigm changes, there is anyway a concentration of wealth in the beginning. When we moved from factory to farm, and people had to come into the cities to make a living, and we had this huge wave of immigrants around the turn from the 19th to the 20th century. People coming here looking for these jobs. There was a yawning increase in inequality. It always happens when you change the economic paradigm. If you have a government committed to the common good, a politics committed to the common good, you try to sand the rough edges off of that so you can keep the economy growing, but you can lift everybody up and they can all be part of it.